Hello and welcome to Runkle of the Bailey. My name is Ian Runkle. I'm a Canadian criminal defense and firearms lawyer. Today I want to talk about a story that's got a little bit of everything. It involves a firearm. It involves Justin Trudeau's ban on the AR-15. It involves a police officer committing crimes. And then, of course, you know it's going to involve the police officer's sentencing discount, because you'd hate to see a police officer sentenced in the same way that you or I might be. That's not how this works. It involves a reporter from the legacy media kind of doing some sloppy work. I have no problem with giving credit where credit is due for good reporting, but I don't think that's what we're going to be doing today. And it also involves the RCMP telling what appear to be some wee little fibs. So let's dive right in. So the headline here is Strathmore Mountie spared criminal record for unlawful firearm possession. Now, I'm not going to read you the full article. I will link it in the description below. I recommend you check it out, if nothing else, then to check my work, because I'm going to be critical here. And so, check and make sure that you agree with me on my take here. All right, so the basics of what happens here is that Constable Blaine Taylor ends up pleading guilty to a count of possession of a handgun without a license. And as a result of that, he is sentenced to a conditional discharge. Now, a conditional discharge means that he'll be on a term of probation, and if he successfully completes that probation, then ultimately it gets discharged and is removed. It doesn't go on his record. And so this is a good sentence for anybody. It's often used for sort of more minor offenses, but it's really good if you want to be a police officer, because then that's not on his record and doesn't cause many problems going forward. There's no indication in the article one way or the other as to whether he got a firearm prohibition, but I would be shocked if they gave him this sentence that is clearly kind of a sentence designed to not interfere with his career, if they also gave him a firearm prohibition. So I'm going to conclude that he doesn't. All right, now we'll talk about the specific terms of his conditional discharge a little later, but let's go and have a look at what they say happened here. All right, so Crown Prosecutor Tom Bouglas told court that Taylor had gone to the range in Northeast Calgary on August 25th, 2021, with his wife and two teenage sons for some practice shooting. So far, no problem. I mean, we expect police officers to put some training in. We expect them to be proficient with everything on their tool belt, but especially lethal force instruments, especially any firearm that they're going to be handling. All right. Bouglas said Taylor brought with him two of his service handguns, a Smith & Wesson and a Colt. And this is where we start getting into the reporting being a little bit sloppy. Because you might think, why would the RCMP have two different service handguns? How does that make sense? Wouldn't you expect some standardization, like pick one model? That way everyone's training on the same thing. Nobody is, grabbing something that they have less practice with. There's less need for parts management. I mean, there's all sorts of good reasons why you'd have one standard handgun. And in fact, the RCMP does have one standard handgun, and that is the Smith & Wesson. They don't issue a Colt handgun. They do issue a Colt, however, and that is the Colt C8. And that's this thing. So you'll notice that is not a handgun at all. And what this is it's an AR-15 pattern rifle. This is covered by Justin Trudeau's ban on the AR-15. So after the order in council, this is clearly a prohibited firearm. And in fact, the magazines are also prohibited devices. So when they say he took two of his service handguns, a Smith & Wesson and a Colt, in fact, the second firearm was not his service handgun. It was this Colt C8. So that kind of changes things. And I don't know whether the reporter is accurately reporting what the prosecutor told the court and then is missing the story about the prosecutor telling something incorrect to the court. That seems like that would be a story worth reporting on. Or if the reporter got that wrong. And I don't know, but either way, that is a reporting fail. Either of those options are a mistake here. So the reason why that matters, of course, is that Justin Trudeau just finished saying, hey, these are weapons of war that have no place on our streets and have no legitimate uses. So, yeah. Now, I thought some people might say, hey, Runkle, you don't know what you're talking about. I mean, clearly this guy would know what the RCMP have issued. So here's the RCMP telling you the same thing. They also talk about the service weapons. I don't know if you're able to discuss that at all, because they noted a Colt handgun. I thought the RCMP service handguns were just the Smith and Wesson.
That's correct.
So the only Colt that the RCMP issued would be like the C8, wouldn't it?
The only Colt product that I'm familiar with is the carbines that we use.
All right, and that's sort of an AR-15 equivalent.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty fair.
Okay. So, the article continues with, the prosecutor said staff expressed some concerns and Taylor secured the firearms and placed them in his vehicle before returning and renting other weapons from the range. Now, this is kind of an interesting thing because, what kind of concerns? Well, this is right after the ban, right? So this takes place when this is banned and there's somebody using a clearly banned firearm with their kids. Now, I don't think that the author of this article seems to have spoken to any witnesses, but I did. I spoke to witnesses, and those witnesses don't want me using their name because they're concerned about, RCMP reprisal. But apparently this guy sort of went in and was bragging about how he, as an RCMP officer, gets to shoot these guns that no one else gets to shoot, because, of course, the rest of us who've been subject to the bans are, the mere peasants, whereas he gets to do all this stuff. And so this raises some questions as to whether or not this is legal, and certainly there would be no problem if he was shooting this on his own. But the question is, can he do this with his wife and 2 kids? All right. Now, that isn't what actually gets him convicted. He gets convicted because he borrows a Beretta from apparently another police officer. Now, why that's not being followed up on, because that police officer would, by handing this unlicensed other police officer a Beretta that he's not entitled to possess, would have therefore been committing the offense of weapons trafficking, which is a pretty serious crime in the criminal code. All right, so he then goes and, he shoots, and ultimately the police investigate this, and he gets arrested and charged for all the things. And by all the things, I mean the possession of the Beretta without a license, but also charges of possession of the C8 without a license. Because the problem is that police officers do have certain powers to possess firearms without a license. And we can look at that. That's in the criminal code right here. So this is section 117.07 sub 1. And this is for exempted persons. It says, notwithstanding any other provision of this act, but subject to section 117.1, no public officer is guilty of an offense under this act or the Firearms Act by reason only that the public officer, A, possesses a firearm, prohibited weapon, restricted weapon, prohibited device, any prohibited ammunition, or an explosive substance in the course of or for the purpose of the public officer's duties or employment. So this raises the question of, is this officer going to the range in the course of his public duties or employment? Well, that's an interesting question. And if he was there on his own, I'd say sure, right? I mean, they're expected to use their firearms for training. They're allowed to do so at ranges because there just isn't enough sort of capacity for the police to provide proper training. But the RCMP actually did a look at this, and they decided that ultimately he was within his duties. And the reason why is this line right here. So the lawyer, and this is his defense lawyer, said officers are permitted to use their service weapons for practice as well as for educational purposes. So Taylor was permitted to allow his sons and wife to use the guns in a safe setting. That seems really odd, right? That this educational purposes. Surely it would make sense for officers to train other officers, but this seems to suggest that officers are allowed in the course of their duties to provide direct hands-on firearm education to the public. Now, I thought, hey, that's cool. And I'm sure many of you are thinking, wow, I want to get in on this. And some of you are probably thinking, hey, I'm going to phone them up right now. I'm going to book myself a time slot. Well, I'm going to save you a phone call because I made the phone call. And here is what the RCMP had to say about whether this is available.
And this is I'm just for context, Constable Blaine Taylor, took his, service, firearms to a range and taught his kids there. And it noted that, officers are permitted to use their service weapons for practice and educational purposes. So I'm wondering how members of the public access, this firearm training provided by police.
I don't believe that there is any specific firearms training that the police offer private citizens. Yeah, I'm not familiar with any of that.
So RCMP duties don't include providing firearm education to the public?
No, that's not one of our roles and responsibilities, other through maybe some online education, perhaps, but not one-on-one training.
Right. And so there's no way for me as a member of the public to get like one-on-one training with a firearm with a police officer.
Not through the RCMP directly, no. That would be nothing there that I'd be familiar with.
So I'm sure you are all shocked and disappointed to discover that this is not, in fact, something that is available to the public. But then why is the RCMP saying that this is fine? You know, if this is not something that the RCMP offer in the course of their duties, why is this okay? And why is it specifically okay when it's something that is apparently only available to the family of RCMP officers to do this with taxpayer-owned guns? This is taxpayer-paid property that they're using as a special benefit to the specific family members of police officers. Yeah, that's not sounding so much like it's in the course of his duties as maybe some sort of corruption or the RCMP not being accurate with what they're saying. Now, do you think the RCMP would write you a letter or would sort of back you up on any of this if you were to take your AR-15, which is just banned, to the range? Certainly, I would expect that if I took an AR-15 to the range, that I would be charged and I would probably not be looking at a conditional discharge. I suspect that I would get a much more harsh penalty than this. And if he was stepping outside of his duties, then that's what we're talking about here. Ultimately, I mean, let's be clear here. I don't think this is the biggest thing. I would say that, we should be able to take our firearms to the range, including our AR-15s. But the fact is that this break that he seems to be getting is one that is only going to be available as a police officer. I can't see anyone else getting the same break. Don't think, hey, I'll be okay if I take my rifle to the range, because that's not what this means at all. And the RCMP certainly aren't going to start, helping you cover your back on this one. And it's also worth noting that the officer here who is, going out and doing this is one of the same people who might be kicking down your door to take your AR-15. So, when he's saying, oh, I get to take my wife and kids out, but the rest of you don't, I got less sympathy in that circumstance. But the real shame of all of this isn't that this officer is getting a break. It's that no one else would. It's that everyone else would be expecting a much harsher penalty for this. And so I've got some real questions as to what went down here. This article doesn't make it clear. Did the prosecutor not understand that this involves, the C8? That would be a concern. This makes no sense to me. It is absolutely mind-boggling. And quite frankly, I'm a little annoyed that this guy is getting this special break. So, yeah. As I said, lots of people are going to be in the comments going, this is no big deal. And it should be no big deal, but it would be a huge deal for anyone else. Now let's talk a little bit about the punishment on this one. So, ultimately, Taylor must serve 4 months of probation, and a condition of his discharge is that he must make a $300 donation to the charity of his choice. And, I mean, at the end of the day, that's going to be tax deductible. So, it's not that big of a hit. Plus, he would have been on paid leave. And because he would have been on paid leave, he's, getting basically what you or I might call a vacation for a lengthy period. And, that paid leave isn't going to be held against him because he's ultimately been cleared on all of this and gotten a conditional discharge and all of that. And, yeah, when you think about how much gas he would have saved just not driving to work every day on that paid leave, I'm going to bet that he actually comes out ahead of this in terms of money-wise. He actually will have turned a profit by this. Yep. Really good to be a police officer. Just fantastic. If you're ever charged with a crime, the best advice anyone can ever give you is to be a police officer. So, yeah, that's about it. Anyway, let me know in the comments below what you think. I suspect I'm going to have some people going, why are you making a big deal of this? But this annoys me. And it annoys me precisely because of the hypocrisy in it. And yeah, that's terribly frustrating. I get people all the time who are trying to figure out some way that they can continue, doing their hobbies. I get hunters who say, like, listen, can I use my favorite hunting rifle? And I have to say, no, you can't. And then we've got this going on. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you found this to be interesting or educational. As I mentioned, full article linked in the description below, so you can check that out. Check my work, see if you disagree with me. I also want to thank my Patreon supporters. At the $50 level, the CCFR, Canada's National Firearms Association, the Canadian Shooting Sports Association, and David Michaud. At the $30 level, Sights at Arms Limited and Jane Babe and Luxor. And at the $20 level, Mark, Lindsay Metcalf, Kyle Fox, Haywire, Gerald to the Bailey, Cameron Johnson, Andrew Elsich, Vicky. Thank you as well to the $10 supporters who will be in the crawl immediately following. Thank you for watching. I hope this has armed you with knowledge.